This is Georgina Rose, and welcome to the Postmodern Iconoclast, a podcast that helps you destroy and break the false icons and idols of the digital age in search of a more authentic esoteric spirituality. On this podcast, we discuss ideology, esoterica, and everything on the fringes of mysticism, religion, and related topics. Hello, this is your host, Georgina Rose, and welcome to the Postmodern Iconoclast. And this episode is a solo episode. I definitely enjoy doing these. I think right around the holidays and into the new year, the show's going to be very solo episode heavy because I'm traveling a little bit and, I want to keep it a little more low-key. And it seems like you guys have been really enjoying the solo episodes. I know some people have requested me do more of them, so yeah, there's going to be more of them for a little while. And in this one, I'm going to talk about a subject that I've thought about making in video form, but I actually opted to do as a podcast because I think that in a way it fits this better because there are so many things that fall into this category. And that would be if it, what are the foundational parts of an occult practice? So obviously, as mystics, esotericists, there are things that we need to learn early on. And I think what people have been forgetting, and one thing I've noticed, and honestly, I've fallen guilty of myself, is that as you get more advanced, as you go deeper into the mysteries, you actually lose touch with some of these basic practices. You forget about them, you forget to return them. And I think everyone is guilty of that to some extent. But it's something as a community I think we should work on. And I think the way to work on that is to start with discussing, well, what are these foundational skills that we need to constantly be working on and coming back to? And this is great also if you're new, because these are the things that I think you should be learning early on. I think that now with the age of TikTok, people are learning, a little bit advanced before the beginner, right? I think people are exposed to these really advanced techniques, these big complicated concepts, before they have learned how to walk. You can't run before you walk, right? So these are the basic things that I think all occultists need to know either how to do or why, kind of like you have to have an understanding of it. And some of these you may not personally use in your practice, though some of these everyone needs to personally use in their practice, but it's still worth discussing, it's still worth learning about, and it's still worth your time. So let's get into the foundations of an esoteric practice. So the first thing you need to learn to be an esotericist is actually incredibly simple. It's one of those things, well, it sounds simple, but in reality it's not. And that is to clear your mind. So when you go into ritual or prayer or meditation or any of these things, the first step is to clear your mind. In our current world, it's impossible to have a clear mind, or at least it may feel like that. There's endless stimulation, right? Like just walk around the street and there's 8 million different things happening, right? And even in your own home, right? You have your computer, you have your TV, you have pop-up ads, you have all the things in your home. Like there's always so much happening. And I think as society has gotten more digital and as technology has progressed, this has become even bigger of a deal, right? People's attention spans are just really, really short. And to try to beat this is so critical because if you can't focus, to do like a simple task. Like I noticed on TikTok, a lot of people were saying that when they go to eat dinner, if they're by themselves, like they're eating dinner alone, they have to have like YouTube or Netflix up in order to sort of get through eating that meal. And ironically, if you're listening to this while eating, I'm not personally trying to call you out. If you do that, sometimes that's totally fine. Sometimes I watch Netflix while eating, but if you're doing it all the time, like you can't be in your own head for more than 5 minutes, that is a problem. I think now people are terrified of being in their own minds. And, there's a lot going into that, right? A lot of people don't want to be in their own minds because they're going through something hard or they have some sort of mental health struggle or something like that, right? Like when they're alone in their mind, it's scary or it's painful or it's uncomfortable, but we need to learn how to do that. We need to learn how to be in our own minds. and how to stop, these rushes of thoughts that we're constantly thinking, right? We need to learn how to quiet our minds. Because if you have so much going through your head when you're going into a ritual, your mind is already sort of polluted by these things, right? And when you do the ritual, your experience is going to be colored by these thoughts and these emotions that you're feeling. So learning to just turn everything down, be in your own mind, in the present moment, not thinking about your grocery list for tomorrow or that thing at work you're really stressed out about, is just so important. And it's a hard skill, right? Like, when you try to learn these things, it's going to be difficult, right? Like trying to clear your mind for the first time is probably not going to work. And it's probably going to be frustrating for a really long time. And that is why it's so important to be constant, be repetitive, and really put in the work to gain these skills. Now, the next skill that I think is really important for anyone who is an esotericist, and this is very much in line with the thing I had just said, is focus. So when you are actually like performing the ritual, this would be after you had cleared your mind and you start actually doing the working, you need to be 100% focused on what you are doing, right? There needs to be no, butting in of other thoughts, no intrusiveness, no thinking, well, I have to do this within the next 30 minutes or the other person who lives with me is going to come home. None of that. Like you need to be 100% present. And that becomes even more important as you get into these more advanced practices, right? As you get into things like Enochian or Goetia, or a lot of these practices that people really get into esotericism wanting to doing, right? The things that people look up to and consider their goals. Like if you cannot focus, you will not get there. And if you do get there without learning how to focus, right? Like you know the logistics of it and you can, perform it, when you're dealing with these spirits that are just so much more powerful than you and that can rock your life if they want to, and can even rock your life if they're not trying, like even the rituals themselves can, throw you into a crazy loop, right? You need to be there. You do not want to be missing things in these rituals, because in a ritual space, like every single little thing that happens often means something and matters. And when you look back at the ritual to contemplate on it, you're going to want to know every little thing that happens. You're going to not want to have these questions about, oh, well, what did that mean? Or, oh, I missed that part. Like you want to be 100% there. Now, this is a little less important if you're in a group ritual, but when you're in a group ritual, everyone's energy is going into that right? So if one person is slacking, if everyone else is doing really well, it does sort of make up for that. But if you are slacking and then everyone else around you is slacking, the whole ritual will suffer. And you all, as a collective, could get into this problem and it could hurt you as a group. So, with these things, like focus really matters, and it only matters more the further down you go in your practice. It is hard to focus. I know like ADHD is really widespread now. We kind of have an ADHD culture, to be honest. No one can pay attention to anything. And I don't think our lifestyle that the average person have is helping with that at all. I think we're living in a way that's very, contrary to how humans are naturally meant to live and how humans are naturally designed to thrive. But, you got to learn to focus. Learning to focus is one of those skills that's going to help you even outside of esotericism, right? That skill, that's going to benefit you everywhere, all the time, right? That's always going to be something that, benefits you. So it's so important to learn that one as well. Now, the next thing that is vital to learn is something that you should be learning early on. You should be learning this before you do any rituals at all, and that is meditation. Meditation is something that I think has gotten a weird rap in the modern world. I think people have, said a lot of things are meditation that might not be meditation, or on the other side, some people act like there's only one type of meditation, right? It's literally just clear your mind, sit, be still, right? That is meditation. And that's not true. There are many types of meditation. There are probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of schools of thought on meditation. If you get into the Eastern traditions, it becomes, even more complicated, right? There's some people who meditation is all that they do as a practitioner, right? Like it becomes their whole thing, and focusing on ideas like Zen and mindfulness, like it actually just is what they do, right? And meditation is powerful. It's not just like something that you do for mental health or whatever. I know a lot of people say that, like, oh, you meditate to, make your mental health better. Meditation does make your mental health better, but meditation isn't solely that. Meditation isn't solely like self-care ooh-woo. I think there's been a broad phenomenon of turning, every spiritual or religious practice into just like an extension of self-care. Like, oh, well, it's all about self-care. This is all self-care. And no, 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 it's more than that. These things are real. But meditation, it's so vital. And I know a lot of people struggle with meditation. I struggled with meditation at first. It was hard for me. I had to figure out, the type of meditation and the position of meditation that works best for me. For me, I realized that my positioning actually made a big difference in terms of my ability to meditate, right? I like meditating in very specific postures. And different meditation postures mean different things. Even simple little things like the placement of your tongue in your mouth, like, has a meaning in terms of meditation. And for me, I just had to find what worked for me, because there were certain things that just did not work. I could not meditate. I could not focus. And the other thing about meditation is there's kind of two different mental modes of meditation. It's the silence thing, and then it's the like going on a sort of journey of visualization type meditation. These are very different things. And I know most people are inclined for one over the others. I'm inclined for the latter personally. But you need to learn to do both, because both of these skills will serve you. And so if you, when you meditate, go on these elaborate like journeys, right? You also need to learn silence. And if you, are only a silence meditation person, you need to learn the other side. I think that meditation is just vital, and you're never going to get anywhere without it, because if you cannot control your microcosm, how are you going to control the macrocosm? If you don't understand your own mind, how can you even understand things beyond it, right? Like, the meditation is the foundation of the house, right? Because know thyself is a rule of mysticism. Every tradition teaches this in some phrasing or another. I like know thyself because I've spent the most time in my practice in Western esotericism, and that is a Western esoteric expression. But every practice stresses this. Even people who are like Abrahamic mystics who get up in arms and are like, well, I don't meditate. There are forms of Christian, Jewish, and Islamic meditation. They might not call it that, but functionally that's what it is, right? A lot of mystical traditions are kind of, depending on what tradition you're looking at, they'll be talking about the same thing, but with a different term. And so just always keep that in mind, right? And figure out what the sort of conversion terms are. Now, the next thing that I think it's so important to learn is visualization. And visualization is something that, I don't know, I think it's kind of hard to explain, because people, when they hear the term visualization, they either think it's like seeing things outside, like just your vision, or it's like just making things up in your mind. And that's not true. Visualization is the ability to see with your mind's eye. And visualization is done in practice in two ways. The first is when you are in a ritual space. Often when you close your material eyes and you open that third eye, you open your mind's eye, you can see the ritual's energies in a different way than when your eyes are wide open. For me, like, I really like having my eyes closed during ritual. I close them a lot, and that's because I like seeing with my mind's eye more, because I can get a better picture of the ritual. When you are at the point of the ritual where you finish an invocation, you are sort of communing with the god or goddess that you are interacting with, I think visualizing with your mind's eye what is actively happening is so important. As well, if you go through a practice like path working, the different paths on the tree of life, you can't do that without visualization. You can't hear the path explained or hear a rune vibrated and then see that path or see that rune if you haven't built up a skill of visualization. And the way that you build up that skill of visualization is with the second thing that I'm going to describe, and that is the ability to see images with your mind's eye. That would be like not just making up random things, like closing your eyes and being like, oh, I see, like whatever first pops in your mind, like controlled visualization. So what you're going to do to learn visualization is, and I don't remember what book I read this in. I read this in a book forever ago, years ago, and it stuck with me. You're going to visualize a ball or a triangle or a square, some sort of shape, and then you're gonna like move it around, right? You're first gonna visualize it and make sure you can see it very clearly, and then spin it around, right? Or if it's a door, like show both sides. Like just make sure you can fully, completely, realistically, make these images in your mind. As well, a common exercise is to visualize like numbers counting down and like visualize the number written on a chalkboard, and then visualize the next number up or the next number down, and you know what I mean? See the numbers change on the chalkboard and just make this your whole focus, right? No distractions. And if you get distracted, some people with these exercises say you should start over. That approach works for some, doesn't work for others. So give that a try. See if you find that beneficial or if you find that just gratingly annoying. But all these little things add up and will lead you to have more successful rituals and experiences as you get more complicated, because these skills only become more valuable as things go on. And the next thing that I think it is so important to learn is about breath. So, breath is life, right? When we breathe in and we breathe out, we are inhaling life, we are exhaling life, like we are doing so much, right? Breath is so important, and breath has an ability to manipulate our minds in a way that is really unlike any other bodily function, right? If you breathe at specific like counts, like I know one of them is 7-5, I believe it's 7-5-8, 7-3-8, something like that. It's some numeric system where if you breathe in for so many seconds, hold for so many seconds, and breathe out so many seconds, it can literally stop panic attacks. Like people who can control their breath can lower their heart rate, like really crazy stuff. Like breath is such a vital part of the human experience. And as mystics, we need to understand breath, right? We need to learn how to control our breath, how to master our breath, and how to use our breath in our ritual for our advantage. You can breathe in a certain number of counts to match the gematria or the numerology of a specific god or spirit to connect to their, metaphysical essence in that way. You can breathe in different patterns to put your mind in different states so that when you're in a ritual, you're in the right state to experience what is happening, because our mental state is actually really powerful, right? I have said many times that esotericism is not all mind, but that does not mean that the mind doesn't play a huge, huge part in the esoteric experiences that we have, right? Our mind is what we are experiencing life through, right? We are at the end of the day a brain and a soul, right? We are not like our hands or our feet, right? We are the thing driving the body. We are driving our flesh suit, right? We are a spirit having a human experience, not a human having a spiritual experience. So understanding our mind is so valuable, and trances, going in and out of different mental states, is so important, because when you're in ritual, you're often in a altered state of consciousness very regularly. Sometimes you're between waking and dreaming. Sometimes you're, having a whole like visual experience where you're like seeing things and hearing things. Like it's very intense stuff, and knowing how our mind impacts this is so vital. I think being able to go in and go out of trance states is really important. And when your ritual experience finishes, you need to know how to take yourself out of that and return to a normal state of mental consciousness, right? You need a lot of control over your mind. And you need to know, like, what sends my mind into different states of consciousness, different states of being. Like, what are, the things that set me off and pull me in? Like, having that level of mental mastery is so important, because you're going to need to transition in and out of these headspaces. And often, like, when you have a really successful ritual, you might enter a state of religious ecstasy, which is this overwhelmed, feeling of joy and love. And, sometimes like you'll start dancing or moving around or saying like, you'll get really overtaken in that moment. And when that moment ends, you need to be able to return back to a normal state of mind, effectively and safely, because sometimes if you're in these really, altered states of consciousness in your ritual, and you try to just like stop in the middle and go back to normal, like let's say your doorbell rings in the middle of like one of the most intense rituals you ever had, and you have to immediately run to the door. Like hopefully that's not happening. Hopefully you're not doing your rituals right before someone comes over, but occasionally life does that. That can really throw you off, and put you into a very weird headspace that can, negatively impact you. So knowing how to control these things, knowing how to bring yourself down in a quick moment is so, so important. because not all rituals go great, right? I know a few people, this has never happened to me, thankfully, where they've been wearing robes during ritual and they've accidentally set the robe on fire, right? And if you are accidentally, set on fire during a ritual, right? In that moment, you do need to stop the ritual. You need to return to a state where you can help this person and fix the situation. So in that moment, like, you would need to know how to bring your headspace back to earth, return to the mundane world, which can be hard, but it's so important to do that. Now, the next thing that I think is so important for esoteric growth is contemplation. So when you have a ritual and that ritual ends, often when we first experience a ritual, we don't fully understand what it means, right? There are things that we just don't get. There are things that are confusing. There's symbols. Like, I've had experiences where I've done a ritual and then, like, 3 years later, I fully put the pieces together of what that ritual meant, right? I've been really like, that was really strange. I don't know what this symbol means. I don't know what this thing I saw meant. And then, like, I'll piece it together later. And so to deal with this, a lot of people recommend you keep like a diary, a journal, or a magical record, right? Which is basically just like a notebook that you use to track your experiences and like discuss them and keep record of them. And I think that's great. I think writing these things down is really good. But you're not going to be able to do anything with what you've written down if you're not able to contemplate it and process it, right? Processing these experiences is a whole thing you have to learn how to do. Like, when you've seen these really out there, dramatic, intense things, like, looking at that and going, okay, well, what does this mean, is a hard thing. Like, if you've ever done a group initiation or some sort of like initiation or big ritual with other people, I mean, really just a big ritual with other people, I'm sure you've had the ritual happen and, seen it affect your life a little later. And it's great to, get out with these people and they'll explain things to you, right? Like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And then you start piecing it together and you're like, oh, well, that's why that happened in my life, right? This level of thinking is just so important. And so I believe, and this is just a model that I created, that a good esoteric practice built on 3 legs: study, praxis, the actual doing of things, and contemplation, right? It's so important to process these things. And, if you see an image or a symbol, like, read books about it, research it, like. And sometimes what's happened to me, like, I remember there was one, this was a very impactful ritual I had, actually. This is one of the most impactful ones in my life. It was very strange. I went into it was actually a group setting, and I had this really intense, like, visual experience of seeing this one image, right? And it really stuck with me. I didn't know what it had to do with that ritual. I was so perplexed by it. And I spent, forever trying to, like, go like, okay, well, what is this from? What is happening? What is this image? And then I remember I was reading a book on religion and it described this exact image. And I was like, holy shit, that's what I saw. And then once I connected those dots, I started thinking, okay, well, how does that relate to what's happened to me recently? And I processed it all through and it all made complete sense. And this was, one of those moments that really springboarded me into an entire big shift in my esoteric practice. Like, it changed everything. And being able to process experiences like that, if you can't do that, you're going to struggle, right? You have to learn how to think and research and, make your brain work. Now, one recommendation that is often given when people start their practice is to learn tarot, right? I would expand this. I don't think you have to learn tarot, but I do think you have to learn some sort of divination, right? I think tarot is a good recommendation. I think there's a reason why people often recommend tarot, because tarot, it teaches you a lot of things besides just predicting the future, right? Tarot is symbolic. It teaches you archetypes. And if you look at the cards correspond to specific Kabbalistic correspondences, specific numerological correspondences, specific astrological correspondences, specific all these things, so that once you understand the tarot, you can pick up a book like Liber 777 and essentially have like a cheat code Rosetta Stone translation guide to every other system, right? If you know tarot, you can learn the planets. If you know tarot, you can learn numerology and gematria like immediately. You can learn the elements, like all these things. And so since it is so correspondence rich, I do think tarot is worth learning for all of these reasons. And also, it's a very common form of divination. A lot of people have written really good books on it. There's some really trash books on tarot out there that make me want to rip my hair out, but there's a lot of like good discussions. And then there's a lot of people who can teach you. You can get IRL teachers for tarot quite easily. You can learn a lot from tarot. So that's why tarot is definitely the recommendation most people give, and I'm not going to challenge that. But I am going to challenge that it has to be tarot. If you are new to esotericism, I think you should pick up a system of divination for, of course, those reasons, because it does teach you correspondence, but also because I think understanding divination gives you a greater ability to process ritual, right? And process your spiritual experiences. Because when you have these really crazy spiritual experiences, you need to look into them, and doing divination on what a specific thing in a ritual meant is so, so helpful. It also can be helpful if you've got a big ritual and you're kind of unsure on whether to do it or not, or you're unsure about how to do divination in advance of that ritual so that you can get insight on what that ritual could be. In terms of divination forms, you can pick whatever you want. Pick geomancy, runes, tarot, all these things, I Ching, right? The only thing I would eliminate is pendulum divination. I think pendulum divination is overly simplistic, and I think has a lot of user error, because if your hands shake at all, pendulum divination is invalid. So skip the pendulum, do anything else. But any other form of divination should be good. Just pick one and stick with it and get good at it. If you want to get good at a form of divination, a big recommendation I would have is just do a daily reading for what your day is going to be like for like a year. And by the end of that year, you'll know all the cards, all the coins, all the runes, whatever it is you're using, like very well. Because you'll have gotten an answer and seen how it plays out in your life so many times. So I think that's a great way to learn. There's also no shame when you're new to a form of divination to using a book, using a white book, using a book about it, like any of that. No shame there at all. Using interpretations when you're new is actually incredibly important. And so the next thing I think that is a foundation of an esoteric practice is having some level of understanding of astrology. Now, you do not need to become an astrologer. I am not an astrologer. For really complicated, like, future readings, I actually do contact my friends who are astrologers pretty regularly. I've had a lot of people do readings for me, and that's totally fine. I like to treat myself to a reading from other people periodically. I think that can be really cool and good and teach you new things, because there are people that are better at these things than I. So I do love treating myself to that. But that does not mean you can get away with not learning any of it. At the bare minimum, as a mystic, you need to know a few things astrologically. The moon phases and what the moon phases mean, the days of the week and the planetary attribution to the days of the week. Monday is the moon, Tuesday is Mars, Wednesday is Mercury, Thursday is Jupiter, Friday is Venus, Saturday is Saturn, Sunday is Sun. If you want a little trick, translate the days of the week name into either Latin or Spanish or really any Romance language, and you'll see it immediately. That is incredibly important for ritual timing. Same with the moon phases. Most people, when they are new, they time things off the moon. I time things off the moon, and I've been doing this for years. Moon timing is amazing because it's just easy to figure out, and it works, and it's consistent, and it happens every month. So if you miss a month, you have an opportunity to do the same ritual at the same time next month. So learn those two types of things, and you're already in a good spot, right? I think you should go further and learn the planetary hours. If you're doing specific traditions, specifically Vedic or Arab mystical traditions, I think learning the lunar mansions is also really helpful. I actually didn't learn the lunar mansions until pretty recently when I started working with and utilizing the Shams al-Marif, which is a controversial Arab Sufi grimoire out of Egypt. And the Shams al-Marif really changed my practice in a lot of ways. I read the selected translation, and now I have the full version in Turkish, and I've been working out of it and using it. It's really been probably my favorite grimoire I've ever used. But the entire grimoire is based off the lunar mansions. And so I wish I had learned the lunar mansions a little earlier on. I think if you're doing either of these traditions at any point, anything Arab, anything Vedic, learn the lunar mansions. They are slightly different lunar mansions depending which on those paths you're going, but it's worth learning. If you're just doing Western stuff, there's really no need to learn the lunar mansions, but it gives you an extra layer of timing, because the lunar mansions are basically like subdivisions of the moon cycle every month. It's 27 or 28, basically sub phases, right? Substations, whatever you want to call them. Knowing basic transits also, I think, is valuable, because, you don't need to know everything. You don't need to know what, like, every single astrological transit is, but knowing, like, what is an opposition, what is a sextile, what is you know what I mean, a conjunction, like those basic terms. If you know those basic terms, you can know like, oh, well, an opposition means that there's like tension. A square means there's tension, right? And then you see like that in the sky, like, oh, there's, you know, the sun is opposite Venus today. I don't know. I just made that up. That's not a real transit. But I would know, oh, well, these two energies are kind of at odds with each other. So if I'm looking at the astrology chart for the day, I'll know, well, maybe I shouldn't use a ritual that would, require these things to be balanced and harmonious, because they're not going to be balanced and harmonious today, right? All these things really help you with rituals. For me, like, my astrological knowledge is much more about how they relate to this current moment, how they relate to ritual timing. And I think that is what you need to learn to be an effective occultist. I think learning the rest of astrology is also incredibly valuable. I mean, hopefully one day I'll know the rest of astrology really well and I can do, like these really complicated things. Like, there's even like medical astrology, there's astrology that you can use to answer specific questions. Like, it's really, really cool stuff. The more astrology you learn, definitely the better. And knowing more astrology makes you a better occultist, right? I wouldn't do the thing where you only do astrology. There are some people who literally are just astrologers and that's it. They don't really have a spiritual practice. At that point, I don't consider you an occultist. I consider you an astrologer, which is completely legitimate, but it is a different thing. But knowing more of it is always better, right? More knowledge is better than less knowledge. So I do think astrology is valuable and important. And I'm not putting astrology in as a form of divination, because they functionally affect us in different ways. Like, knowing a tarot or a rune and knowing an astrology, it's very different. So astrology, I don't think counts as those one form of divination to learn, in my opinion. Now, the next thing that I think it's so important to learn is the ability to use sigils and symbols and understand sigils and symbols. The best way, I think, to learn about sigils and symbols is to make your own. I think basic sigil magic, like the stuff that they teach in like basic chaos magic books, is really valuable. Sigil magic is not a huge part of what I do, but I learned sigils so early on in my practice, and it really does help you out later on, because as you get into more advanced stuff, you're going to see seals, symbols, like they're going to come up again and again and again, and you're going to need to use them, right? You're going to need to make a layman out of a specific symbol. You're going to need to draw a circle with a specific symbol. And if you don't know how like symbols and sigils work and like how to interact with them energetically, how to, make them charged, how to visualize them, all these things, you're going to struggle. Obviously, making a sigil and using a sigil that was made for a deity 100,000, well, not 100,000 years ago, like thousands of years ago, right? That was received in a vision, right? There's obviously, those are different things, but if you know one of them, the other comes more naturally. As well, like learning what symbols means, I think is really important. Like, if you see some sort of like complicated sigil, learning to break it down to its parts is so valuable. Like, if something has a circle around it, it is enclosed. Whereas if something does not have a circle around it, it is open. And so when you see different things, like if you're looking at something, you'll know, oh, okay, well, I understand a little bit about what this symbol is doing. As well, like if you don't know these basic things about sigil construction, it can cause you problems down the line. I have seen some people, and this makes me mad every single time because I think it's so reckless, who get into Goetia and they draw the Goetic demon sigils without a circle around them, which, that makes it much less contained. That makes it much more dangerous. And if you're doing Solomonic magic, that is just actually wrong. And you might not know that that little circle makes such a difference if you didn't learn basic sigil making and basic symbolic literacy early on. As well, understanding symbols is going to make reading myths better, and a lot of invocations are from myths, and so if you can't analyze them, you're going to struggle when you have to use them. Now, my next thing that I think is important to learn, and I'm not saying learn this on a super deep or intense level, but you just need to understand it a little bit, is basic dream interpretation. So dreams hold a lot of information in them. Our dreams are shown to us by our subconscious, and every dream that we have is telling us something. Even if it's weird, even if it's random, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, and you're just like, okay, well, that just felt like an acid trip, right? Those dreams are still sent to us from our subconscious for a meaning, for a reason. And so if you actually, I've even done this with the most weird dreams I've had. If you analyze it and think about it for long enough and ask yourself questions about it, you'll often find a hidden meaning in the dream. And you'll go, oh, that's why my subconscious was showing me that. And why this is important for ritual is the night you sleep after a ritual, often your dreams are going to show you things related to the ritual, right? I remember this was not pretty early on, like once I had been practicing for a while, but I had just interacted with other occultists for the first time. I went to this group ritual at this like occult shop. I'm not going to share where it was, but I was at this like occult store and they were doing like a full moon ritual. And I remember distinctively when the ritual ended, the girl who was leading the ritual said, make sure you pay attention to what happens in your dreams tonight, right? Because that could be continued information because it's a lunar ritual. And I was like, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. And then I noticed that night my dream was related to the ritual. And I've noticed this on my own. It doesn't have to be a lunar spirit, but just in general, like pay attention to your dreams the night after rituals, right? Like they often are telling you continued information. And as well, there are certain practices where the dream itself is what is used to get information. There are certain practices from the Arab world involving jinn where what you'll do is you will invoke the jinn before you go to sleep, and you have to sleep alone. You can't sleep with someone else in the same room as you. And basically, the jinn will come in your dream and answer the question you're asking. This is kind of a form of, spirit-based divination. And what you'll notice is when you do a dream, because I've done this practice myself, is through the night, like I had these crazy dreams the first time I did this. They were really intense, vivid. I remember them perfectly, but they didn't like directly answer my questions. It's right. It's not like I went to sleep and then it said yes, or, oh, you'll get, hired on this day or whatever, right? That's not what happened at all. They were symbolically layered dreams. And when I started analyzing them, I was like, oh, this completely answers my question. This is the answer that I needed, but I needed to analyze it and look deep into it to really grasp how it is answering my question. So the next skill that I think is so important as an occultist is scrying. So scrying is actually kind of hard. And so I don't expect people to know how to scry immediately. It took me a while to learn scrying. Once I got it though, and I was like, oh, well, yeah. But scrying is hard. And scrying is basically looking into any object and seeing images and basically getting divinatory or channeled information that way. Scrying can be done most classically in a crystal ball. Now, I hate scrying into a crystal ball. I think it is the hardest way to scry. I can do it. I've done it successfully, but it's incredibly difficult, and I don't think it's really the most effective way to scry. I think that it's certainly the most aesthetic, but I don't recommend crystal ball scrying really at all. The easiest way to scry is to smoke or flame scry. So what you're going to do is light incense and scry the smoke patterns of the incense. That's pretty easy. Or you're going to take a candle and light the flame and gaze into the flame. This was a practice recommended in a couple traditions. There's one Kabbalistic version of this where you put oil on your eyes and then do this, which just seems like insane. Don't do that. That's going to kill your eyes. In general, staring at a flame is actually kind of bad for your eyes. So definitely do this spread out. Maybe you could wear like those eclipse goggles and it make it less bad. I don't know the science on that, but I guess you could try that. But generally, like flame scrying, very effective, pretty simple, very historic. It's one of the most historic ways we know mystics have scryed, but it can hurt. I believe it's your retina or cornea. I don't know. It can fry something in your eye over time. So definitely spread that one out. Smoke, I think, wins the edge because of that. Also, like if you scry into a flame for too long, it can kind of make your vision a little weird for a little bit. Kind of like if you stare at the sun, I've noticed. But it is effective. Now, another way to scry that's really popular, and this method's pretty good, but you need a specific like tool to do it, is to have like an obsidian or really dark black bowl. I think obsidian, like the crystal, is definitely the superior way to do this, and fill it up with water and gaze in the water, right? And another way is to use a like obsidian mirror or a black mirror and scry into the black mirror. This is definitely easier than the crystal, but the water definitely beats out the mirror version. There's a lot of tutorials online to make your own like scrying mirror that you can follow. Very easy DIYs though. So, with scrying, find what works for you and stick with it. I think smoke scrying is probably the place to start because it is just the easiest. And also when you're in a ritual, like scrying is a great way to see the spirits, commune with the spirits. A big thing if you've been part of like Western esotericism is you've seen the black scrying mirror inside of the triangle called the triangle of art, where you'll place it outside of your circle and you'll kind of trap the spirit in the triangle art and you'll scry. Essentially, it's just scrying into the triangle of art and channeling things or whatever. So you definitely need it to do anything like that, which is a big part of like advanced Western esotericism. But also like when you're in the middle of like a simple thing, like maybe you're just repeating the Orphic hymns and using that as like a theurgy type prayer, watching what the smoke is doing on the incense is valuable valuable. And that is a form of scrying, even if it's a little simpler and stripped down. Like, that is sometimes going to show you some messages. And also scrying, it really develops your intuition, which my next point is intuition. Your intuition is so important as a mystic, right? I think in our world, we devalue intuition and we tell people to go against their intuition all the time, right? Like, you're told, oh, like, if you get a bad vibe, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a bad vibe, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. Like, if you get a bad sense about someone, they might actually be good. You don't know, right? A lot of these things, like, we're really told to not trust our intuition. And we need to trust our intuition. Our intuition is often right. If something feels off, assume it is off. It often is off. Like, there's so much we can learn from our intuition, and our culture, like, neglecting intuition, I just think is so harmful and damaging. And it doesn't just hurt us on a mystical level, it hurts us on a societal and cultural level, but it also definitely hurts us on a mystic level, because being able to intuit is so important to get these symbols and signs, right? Like, when you've done a ritual, you're going to see these things called synchronicities afterwards, right? You're going to leave the ritual and you're going to see, oh, well, I invoked Inanna and I keep seeing these deep blue colors, or I invoked Saturn and I keep seeing the number 333 or threes and all that. And if you don't have intuition, like, you're going to miss synchronicities. And if you don't have an intuition that you understand, you're going to think things are synchronicities when they're not synchronicities. The ultimate test of a synchronicity, in my opinion, is if your gut is telling you, oh, this means something, right? Learn to trust your gut, learn your intuition, learn this part of knowledge that is so neglected in our society, and you will grow so much as a practitioner. I can't even understate how much I recommend it. Now, the next skill that you're going to need to learn is vibration. So by vibration, I mean the ability to vibrate, which is basically like speaking esoteric names in a specific tone. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to embarrass myself. Actually, no, I can do it. Okay, my throat's a little scratchy because of this season, but here we go. Ta. That was not my best vibration, but you get the point. It's this kind of like when people start at meditation, they're like, oh, it's like you go or whatever, right? It's kind of like that. There's another version of it called Galder that is like the Nordic version where you say like, oh, Dala. It gets louder and louder and louder. I'm not a Nordic pagan, okay? That was beautiful. Learning how to do this effectively is so valuable, because when you're doing ritual, like, sometimes it'll say in the instructions, oh, you need to vibrate this. And knowing how to vibrate, it resonates in a specific tone that it creates a thing in ritual. You just have to do it in ritual to get it. Vibration sounds dorky and weird until you're actually in an esoteric ritual and you're doing it and you're like, oh, I'm really connecting right now. This is crazy. Now, the next skill that I think is so important to learn is energetic manipulation. So all around us, there are energies all the time. Everything is vibrating, everything is moving. And so being aware of this and developing a sort of clairsentience, I think, is very valuable, because people always ask me, like, how will I know if my invocation has worked? Do I just start seeing things? And, sometimes you do start seeing things. Sometimes you do see the spirits. Like, sometimes that does happen. But oftentimes it's actually a lot more subtle, right? It's more like the vibe changes. The air feels different. You'll hear something faint in your ears. Like, something like that is much more common. And if you don't have awareness of the energies around you, you don't have this level of clairsentience, then you're going to be unable to do this. And so it's so important to, like, develop an awareness of what's happening around me, right? And this goes back to a lot of the stuff I was saying at the beginning of this podcast about focus and meditation. But you also need to control your own energy, like feel your own body of light, because we have a physical body, but we also have an energetic body. And feeling our energetic bodies are so important, and understanding how different ritual practices affect and shift our energetic bodies is also really, really valuable. And learning how to control energy is great. It's a silly little psionics thing, but I learned this early on, and I actually do quite like it. And it's to learn to form a little ball of energy in your hands, right? You, like, hold your hands together and you just, like, focus on the energy between them, and you feel the sort of tension between your fingers, and you create this little ball, and you can bounce it, move it around. It's very psionic-y, but skills like that will give you so much control over your energy. As well, if you learn techniques like astral projection or remote viewing, you're going to really learn your body of light. So doing something like that, like, even if it's just little things like that, you can get really advanced with it in certain sects of Taoism. People get, like, really like Jedi mind trick level. Like you could do really crazy stuff with your energy. So some people claim they can like make fire with their energy. I've never done that. I don't know if that's true, but there are like Taoists who claim they can like start fires, and like I've seen people do weird things. So I've seen people in front of me do crazy stuff with energy. So, you know, I'm not closed off to that. Maybe it's true. I've always said like magic is not fireballs, but maybe if you're like some level 10,000 Taoist master, maybe you can. What is possible, my spectrum for what I think is possible is just continuously expanding as I go deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole. So learn to manipulate energy, learn to control it, and learn what is around you. And with that, that's really all I have to say. Those are what I think the foundational skills are. Do you guys have opinions on what you think the foundational skills are? Comment below anything that I missed that you think is a foundation. And if you are a more advanced practitioner, if you've been doing this for a while, you know, I think this podcast should motivate you to try to brush up on your foundations, right? I've tried to, you know, improve my ability to meditate recently. And I've been able to meditate for so long, but I've noticed like really just returning to that has given me some growth. So I wanted to kind of inspire you guys to do that too. Do it with me, right? Let's return to the foundations together so that, you know, we are doing, you know, consistently better and we're getting consistent growth. Because obviously our goal is consistent growth, personal development, and eventually gnosis. You can't do gnosis if you can't build foundation. So that's all I have to say. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, subscribe. You can subscribe and help out the podcast through Patreon. You get all the episodes early. You get a bonus pre-show. You get a bonus Sabbath special that's 8 times a year. I do it with the Neo-Pagan Sabbats. The next one will be Yule. So that's going to be really soon. That's going to be like, I mean, when this episode goes up, I think that's going to be like a couple days away. I'm not quite sure because I do pre-record these before they go up. But based on my estimates, that will be really close to when this episode posts. So, yeah. You can also find me, the host, on Telegram, TikTok, YouTube, Patreon, Substack. I don't know. I'm literally everywhere. I don't think there's a single like major social media platform I'm not on. I used to be on Twitch. I'm really inactive on Twitch. I haven't Twitch streamed in forever. So I guess I'm not on that one. But I do actually have an account. You can still subscribe, even if nothing's going to happen with it anytime soon. Maybe I'll get back into streaming. I've been on a few other people's streams recently. I think that's what I'm going to do for a while. But maybe one day I'll get back into streaming. Who knows? Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. And if you've been a major supporter, you do get your name read off at the end of every show. So thank you to Abka, Charlotte. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being our lovely, mysterious benefactors. And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Have a nice day, afternoon, mid-morning, mid-evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are.